There I was, a little kid, really long hair, motorcycle boots, listening to Hendrix, Zeppelin, and Black Sabbath, and Wes Montgomery and James Brown, and just about everything you can imagine. It was a great atmosphere.
You're listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans, Kurt Newman, a T. Torrance Productions original podcast.
Comic book, sci-fi, silver surfery, love is the power supreme atmosphere. Imagination is funneled through 6 steel strings and a blowtorch of high gang Marshall half stacks, double picking, hammer off, whammy tapping 24 frets to the mind and through the mind to the grasping, grooving fingers of the alchemist, the master, the teacher, the one in control, the heart and the soul. On today's show, Staring at the World with Mr. Joe Satriani. I'm Kurt Newman, and we are staring at the world today with a 15-time Grammy Award nominee. He sold over 10 million records, making him the best-selling instrumental rock guitarist of all time. In April of this year, he's released The Elephants of Mars, his 19th record. Welcome to the show, Mr. Joe Satriani.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that crazy introduction. Every time I hear all those things, it makes my head spin.
Yeah, but it's some good accolades. Now, if people who don't already know you, I'm assuming most people know who you are already, but someone who's taken the guitar about as far as anyone on this planet has. So I'm really happy you were able to talk to me today. We met briefly in Austin when you were on the Hendrix type tour with Kenny. I think that was 2019. I'm not sure, but sometime around there.
Yeah. Kenny Aronoff and Doug Pinnick. Amazing. Wow. We did 2 tours that year that were just like psychedelic. It was so much fun. It was really great.
I like to start when I talk to people kind of at their beginnings, because for me, why I wanted to do this podcast at all was because, I took a pivot when I was pretty young into music because, my parents were real blue-collar working people, and I didn't really connect with school and how they were teaching and stuff. And so when I saw this opportunity to get into music, it just totally took me. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about your humble beginnings. Can you talk to me a little bit about what life was like for you as a kid and your parents, what they were doing, or was your life real ordinary? Was there something that kind of triggered it for you?
Well, I was blessed with growing up in a great family, youngest of 5 kids. And my parents were really supportive or really tired by the time I became a teenager. But they let me start taking drum lessons at 9 years of age, and then when I moved to guitar, the day that Hendrix died, it was like one of those things where I announced at the dinner table what was going to happen, and but they as the years went on, they let my band rehearse in the basement. This is growing up in Westbury and Carr Place, Long Island, right in the middle of Nassau County. And they would talk the police down anytime the neighbors would try to get us to stop playing. And maybe it's because of, as I said, they were tired. I was the youngest. It was, I came along starting to play guitar in 1970, and the 60s was a social upheaval for families like my parents. Yeah, children of immigrants who had lived through the Depression and World War II, and all of a sudden the 60s come and they had kids. Everything went upside down. So I really think I did benefit from it, and it was an amazing time for electric guitar from 66 to 76. Maybe that period is pretty amazing. Yeah. Because it was all so new. It was all reimagined. It wasn't like a refinement of something before. Everything was deconstructed and then in the process of being reconstructed. Yeah. So there I was, a little kid, really long hair, motorcycle boots, listening to Hendrix, Zeppelin, and Black Sabbath, and Wes Montgomery and James Brown, and just about everything you can imagine. It was a great atmosphere for me. I always felt it was really great.
I find that really interesting. Excuse me. When I was in fourth grade, they asked if we wanted to start, if you could take lessons to get out of school, out of class for 1 hour each week. And so I was like, yeah. But I started on the drums too. It was really my first love. And I kind of feel like I got tricked into being on the guitar because I was really happy playing the drums in the back and not having to sing or do anything. So I find it's interesting that you started on drums too. How long did you kind of stick with that before you got to guitar?
It seems like about 3 years. There was a guy used to come over to the house in the early evenings. His name was Mr. Patricus, and he was a super jazzy cat. You know, he'd come over wearing a sharkskin suit, have some coffee with my parents, smoke cigarettes during the drum lessons, and he was just the swingingest cat ever. And I learned how to read. I tried my hardest, but ultimately I felt like the four limbs did not want to cooperate in a way that sounded like what I was hearing. You know, it didn't sound like John Bonham or Mitch Mitchell or, Ringo or Charlie. It sounded like I was doing something else. And it started to fade. So by the time I hit 12, I think I started to realize this may not really work. Yeah. And then, just a little under 2 years later, by then I was like a total Hendrix freak anyway, as a fan, so I started to drift towards guitar.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I read a story now, it seems kind of a famous story for you, and I don't know if it's true or not, but that the day Jimi Hendrix died, they say you walked off the football field, basically telling your coach, I'm done, now I'm a musician, I'm going to play guitar in Jimmy's honor. Is it true?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, you can imagine I was not destined to be a great football player.
Yeah, me neither.
But at that age, it was just the beginning of when kids start to either they're going to be 6'4" and 300 pounds or they're not, And so it was a pivotal period anyway. And I was standing outside the gym with all my gear on, and a teammate came up to me and said, hey, that guy that you're crazy about, I just heard that he died. And it did really hit me like a ton of bricks. And yeah, I did. I just turned around and walked into the coach's office and told him exactly why I was quitting. And he didn't, I don't think he was upset that he was losing me from the team, either that, or he saw on my face that I was so totally serious. So there was no point, Anyway, so yeah, it's true. And I did feel really brokenhearted by the whole thing. I could not, you got a really small brain when you're 14 anyway, it's mostly flesh and bones and hormones and everything. But I could tell this was a sad but momentous moment, in my life.
Yeah. For me, the music room in the school was really a nice refuge from what was going on in the school as well, the chaos, I kind of was one of those people who I think, I didn't like all the chaos of school. It was too intense. So when I found the music room and there was a drum kit sitting there, it was, for me, I was like, this is what I connect with, this is where I fit in. And so did you have any of that with music in your life at that early age where you felt like you could escape into it sort of?
Oh yeah. You can imagine, with again, house with 7 people in it, and the age difference, I was about 9 years younger than my older sisters. So I saw them and, was with them as they were going through early 60s rock music, everything that happened in the 60s with popular music. My parents were jazz lovers. And so there was always jazz and classical music being played in the house. If it wasn't my siblings playing every kind of rock and roll, British invasion, Motown, soul music, blues, you name it. And, one by one, as they grew up and left the house to go to college and to move out, they would leave me with their records because for them, it was part of their youth that they didn't want to associate with anymore. Oh, wow. It's typical, as kids grow up, they go, well, Dave Clark 5, that's what I liked when I was 12 or something. So they give it to the younger brother. And I loved all of it. I didn't have any social connection with any of their music. I just thought it was something so special and unique that I could take it in for what it was. You know what I mean? It's sort of like as you get older.
You weren't protesting. You were just
you're walking the halls of your high school. It matters the bands that you identify with and the kind of music you like. But for a little kid, under 10 years old, anything's okay.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the way it was for me. So I would listen to Wes Montgomery and Dave Clark 5 in the same day.
Yeah.
And it didn't bother me.
Right.
I thought it was great.
That's one of the things I talk about too. I didn't have the record collection, but I had a nice AM radio, and AM radio used to play all kinds of stuff back then too, so I was getting a lot of different stuff. It might have not been Wes Montgomery necessarily, but it was a lot of different, everything that was leaning country to British pop to American rock kind of, and everything like that. Same kind of thing, and you really kind of take it all in. But I did read that you studied with some jazz cats as well, Billy Bauer and Lenny Tristano. And I wanted to ask you, how much did that kind of, you think, influence some of where you went in the guitar?
Oh, it was really an interesting foundation I got. I have to say that the main foundation was, besides, Mr. Patrikas taking music lessons and understanding how to read drum music and how to practice, that was an important setup for what happened in high school with a guy named Bill Westcott. And he was a really young Juilliard graduate who wound up in this little public high school, Carl Place High School.
Wow.
And I had to take music classes. So I was in the chorus. I took a general music class, and then he started a music theory class. So I learned all music theory from Bill Westcott in high school. And as I got into my last year of high school, I was allowed to double up on subjects so I could graduate a half year early. Me and about 6 other kids. I think they just wanted to get rid of us, But so I wound up taking 2 advanced music theory classes per day from Bill, and it was fascinating. I wound up with this university education in music from Bill, and I would go home and sort of translate it into electric guitar music. When I graduated after that half year, I started looking for somebody out there who could take me to the next level. And I did take 3 lessons from Billy Bauer. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know, his legacy as a jazz guitarist. I didn't know who Lenny Tristano was at the time either.
Right.
And he, I think he was extremely relaxed in the way that he gave lessons. Yeah. And I had a hard time trying to figure out really what his mental state was, but he did have these little pamphlets with arpeggios and scales in 3+ octaves that really had a big impression on me. So I would get these little teeny pamphlets, and I'd bring them home and just devour them every day. So after 3 weeks, I realized I'm not going to go back to this guy. He's not really interested that much in rock music anymore. And I wound up going to Five Towns College. I decided not to go to the Berklee School of Music, and I wanted to go someplace local on the island. It was a new college starting up not too far from where I grew up. And this was a mistake. And while I was there trying to get through one semester, another student that I was going to school with was a real jazzer. And I started to complain to him one day about how I was looking for that, that new guru that would show me the secrets of music. Because I said, I know the scales and the chords and the theory, but there's something missing. And he said, Lenny Tristano. Now you have to remember, I got to tell you this, it's so funny. When he told me this, I was at his house and he was showing me his pet monkey. This is it's such a bizarre, side part to this story, but for some reason, he had a pet monkey, something like this. This thing was intense, right? And so while I'm sitting there trying to hold on to this monkey, he's telling me about Lenny Tristano. And I took it as a sign that I had to act on this thing, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, turns out Lenny, lived 20 minutes away from me. I didn't know that. He was living in Queens at the moment. And, I learned after, getting his number and doing a little bit of research as much as I could, you had to go to the library to look at things back then, that he was considered the father of cool jazz. He was the first guy to rehearse, perform, record freeform jazz way before Miles Davis. And, he's completely blind. And it was just, the whole story was intense.
Yeah.
And meeting him and all of his students, getting into that whole Lenny Tristano world was just turned everything upside down for me, but set me on a path that taught me how to always teach myself every single day. And that's kind of like was Lenny's thing, was to get in touch with, harness your actual musicianship, never think or act in the subjunctive mode, and only play what you want to play. Those lessons were so intense, but so important to my development as a musician.
Yeah, and that you're really fortunate. It sounds like even in high school and stuff, you were running into teachers who had great sensibilities about music, and a kid growing up too, where I took all those music classes in high school too, but I got sent to the office because I would show up and start playing the drum kit, and it pissed the teacher off. So he's sending me to the principal. The principal's asking me why I insist on trying to be Ringo Starr. Well, to me, this is what music is about, right? It's about like we're playing, we're doing something. Everybody jump in. The guy you ran into inspired you. The guy I ran into was trying to shut it down, which very often, that's why kids are turning to rock music and stuff too, was to kind of escape that people shutting you down, right? Some place you can go to express and get it all out. But it's nice that you found people to inspire. I think that can make such a huge difference for anyone out there. And you started going on after having good teachers. You were able to teach a lot of people too. I mean, there's your famous stories for teaching people like Steve Vai and all those people you have taught to play. I imagine because you ran into really good teachers like that as well.
Yeah. The funny coincidence was that below me a few years were a bunch of really great players, one of which was Steve Vai. Grew up not too far from me. We went to the same school. Yeah. We did wind up being tutored by Bill Westcott, the music teacher at Carr Place High School. And that's where we both got our basis in theory. But once I started playing at 14, in less than a year, I started to do parties, high school dances, things like that. And kids started to come to my front door looking for lessons. Nice. And one day it was Steve Vai who did come with a pack of strings in one hand and a stringless guitar in the other. And he said, you teach my friend John Sergio, can you teach me how to play, And so it was really interesting that we met so early, but we immediately bonded, and he was a great student. And I was just a couple of years ahead of him, maybe a year and a half. So I was really, it was really like kids teaching kids, and when I moved to Berkeley, California, I reluctantly started teaching at a guitar store because I was hanging out there all the time and I never bought anything. And the owner was getting upset. And he said, well, if you're going to hang out here all day long, how about giving a couple of lessons? Maybe it'll help with the traffic, Yeah. And so I was new in town and I thought, okay, might as well start. And then what I didn't know, but soon learned, was that thrash metal was being born in this little area here and in the neighborhoods around this guitar store. Wow. And Kirk Hammett, Alex Skolnick, Larry LaLonde, they all started coming in for lessons, and I started to notice this whole new form of music that these kids were making. It was really exciting.
What year was that?
That would have been, I think I started teaching in 78, I think. And it seemed like by 1980, all those kids, they all started to show up.
Yeah.
And it was broad because, Kevin Cadogan from Third Eye Blind, and I'm thinking, let's see, David Bryson from Counting Crows, Charlie Hunter. I mean, it was just the mix of these young kids and how different they were from each other was pretty remarkable. And they went in different paths. Like when I think about like Alex Skolnick and Kirk Hammett, pretty much the same age and into thrash metal. But their paths were so divergent because, Alex really had a deep appreciation for jazz, and it led him to get a degree. But still they still play true to their form, which is really, I think, is really cool.
Be Bold bars are back, you guys. You all know how much I love these bars and their founder, Stacy. If you're new here, Be Bold bars were founded by Stacy Madison, the founder of Stacy's Pita Chips. Her new bars, Be Bold bars, are refrigerated energy bars made with nuts, nut butters, honey, maple. They're absolutely delicious. Plus, all 4 flavors are gluten and dairy free, which is really good. If you're new to Be Bold bars and you want to give them a try, I recommend trying the combo pack they offer at BeBoldBars.com. It comes with both almond butter and peanut butter flavors. Plus, if you use the BOLD code, which is hard to say, BOLD, at checkout, you will receive 20% off. That code BOLD for 20% off at BeBold.com. I know you're going to like them. When I first started playing drums, it came really fast to me, and I developed this kind of theory of like, you don't need lessons because you should develop what's inside you and just find everything on your own. I switched to guitar when I got out of high school just to learn to write songs, and never intended to be a guitarist or front of the band. I just kind of ended up there. But in retrospect, when I look back at the guitar, it seems like there's probably things that would have pushed me along a lot quicker had somebody showed me a bunch of things instead of taking years to kind of find it. So what's your feeling about that? Should someone lock themselves in the room and just discover, or does it help a kid to go find some instruction, you think?
Oh, it's totally up to the personality.
Yeah.
It's not an intellectual thing. I used to get that a lot, where a student would come in and they'd say, "Why do I have to learn how to do this?" B.B. King never took lessons, or
right.
Jimi Hendrix didn't know theory or something like that. And so, the only answer a teacher can give is you just go, "Oh, okay. Can you play like Hendrix?" Right. Okay. How about B.B. King? How about any of those people you mentioned? Can you play like them? Well, okay. If you can't, then perhaps you need a little something, a little extra something to get you to where you're going. So I think eventually, within about a couple of minutes of sitting down with me, they realize, oh, I get it. It's got nothing to do with it. It's not going to change me forever. Yeah. It's not like I'm cutting a limb off or, changing my personality. I'm just really trying to help myself. And that was the idea, was to try to get the students to see the talent that they had in them and to bring it out. But in general, those first 10 minutes of a lesson were pretty painful because I had to show them the state they were in.
Yeah.
And I had to show them the difference between where they wanted to go and where they were.
Yeah.
And then say, now I can help you get there, but I am going to be ruthless about it if you want me to.
Right.
And I said, do you want to be great, or do you just want to play some songs when you get home from school or work or whatever? and I would tailor the lessons based on their response. So, Kirk Hammett was like, I'm coming twice a week. I want to be the best I can be as soon as possible. So I said, okay, here it comes.
Right. And you're teaching a lot of technique as to oppose, like I was listening to the Stones, right? I want to write songs like the Stones do and stuff. So, but you were dealing with a lot of people who really wanted to learn advanced technique in the guitar. So it's a different story.
It's really interesting because like if you're listening to Neil Young play Cinnamon Girl, there's a lot of technique there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That a guitar player would not understand if they just picked up an acoustic guitar or they had a Telecaster and a twin reverb. I mean, there's nowhere you can't get from there to there, unless someone says the reason why Neil sounds like that, besides the tuning of the guitar and the way that he plays it.
Right.
How about the guitar? How about the amp? How about the way it's recorded? These things are important for a young player who might be in a band who's playing all the time. So yes, I am saying, let's talk about the key of D and how you don't have to stay in that key, but your audience is going to react to your shifts of D-ness, is it D Mixolydian? Is it D blues? Is it Dorian? Like, what is it? You play with it, they react. So there are no rules. There's only cause and effect. Right. So if you want this effect, then you put this into what you're playing. Right. But I also have to, and I can from experience say, put you want that Neil Young sound, put the delay before the amp distortion.
Right.
You want that other sound, you want Uli John Roth, you put the delay afterwards. Right. You apply that in the studio. So there were lots of things that were practical, pick thickness, string size, tuning, maintaining the guitar. We went into all of it, but I was insisting to them that they would learn where every note on every string was everywhere on the guitar. I insisted that they play all the scales and all the modes in every key. Yeah. And I'd say, it's going to take a while, but we'll go through it, spend a couple of minutes on it, and then we'll move on to the other things. I always made sure that I taught them all or part of their favorite song of the week. That to me was the most important part of the lesson, because especially if you're dealing with an 8-year-old kid, if they can't go home, and play the riff to Crazy Train, even just 5 seconds of it, they'll give it up. But if they can do that while hanging out with their friends, then they'll come back next week and maybe they'll listen to, that funny old guy, that rocker who's trying to get him to do scales and stuff.
Speaking of that, I released my first record on Warner Bros. 1986. It seems like you were releasing your first record around the same time in the 80s there. And I remember, you got a lot of attention for the Surfing with Aliens record and stuff, and really, like instrumental, fast playing rock really started to take off in a way that it really hadn't been heard that much before. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how it's kind of changed since then. When I talk to other people about this too, like when you went into a studio back then, there was kind of no faking it. You had yourself in a room, you had an engineer with tape, and what you heard off that tape and playback was pretty much what you were putting down, as opposed to today's recording techniques where everything about what you record can change from the time you put it down. But there was kind of a weeding out process in how we started doing it back then. And can you talk a little bit about how that was for you to where we've gotten to now, with what we had then, the tools we had, and how that kind of helped develop artists and bands?
Yeah, you can talk about that for just like hours and hours about, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Who knows what it is? Yeah. I do know that decision making is so important. And we, in the early days of recording with tape, as you pointed out, you really did have to make a bunch of decisions, and then they'd push record and you would play, and that would pretty much be it. And there was tape editing, and you could overdub, and maybe if you had a really good engineer, you might be able to punch in notes, that were bad. But it wasn't flawless like it is today, where you can't tell what was performed and what was manipulated. But at the same time, I think that your creativity very often was hit with these roadblocks because of your perception of what you could do with tape. And you can see that in the 60s, where bands like the Beatles, let's say, would manipulate tape with razor blades and adhesive tape to create mixes that could never be performed live.
Right.
And so, and then, recording things, slowing them down, recording them fast, recording them slow, backward stuff, all that. It seems funny now, but that was a good example of how your perception of what you can do with the tools has a lot to do with the end result and how creative it is. So today, if you do the comparison, you might think, well, there are no boundaries today because you can fix anything that's out of time or out of tune, and you can reharmonize forever. Even after you release the album, you can reharmonize everything on it and re-release the album. You can do that every day for the rest of the year. And there's a place for it. The digital world will receive whatever you want to upload. So that is really daunting. But when you take a look at it from a creative perspective, again, it comes back to you. And you have to ask yourself, well, what is it that I want? Do I want 150 tracks of guitar, or can I say it with one performance? It never goes away. I don't think it really changes that much. And I think that none of it will ever answer the question the musician has, which is, are people going to like it? Like, if I write a song about this guitar pick, is anybody going to pick up on that? Are they going to feel what I felt? And there's no way to know that. And the only way for the artist to approach that is put your honest, truthful performances down as best you can. And when you're done and you release it, then that's it. You can't make people like it. You can't make decisions for other people. So you should just move on and start writing another song, about something else. And I've had so many moments in my recording career where I've had great advice from, engineers and producers. Like I've worked with both of the Johns brothers.
Nice.
And Andy Johns used to talk a lot about how crazy it was, how they had to make decisions when they only had 8 tracks to make an album, and they would comp things and they'd have to basically mix it. And once, background vocals or bass, drums, rhythm guitar were mixed, that was it. And they committed, and they would do that all day long, hour after hour. And then when they were done, they'd hand the record over and head off to the pub, and that was it. And there's a certain bravery to that. You know what I mean? And they're looking at tomorrow saying, well, we can't make people like it, but this is the best that we can do today. So now let's move on, you know?
Yeah. We started our demos on a 4-track, basically I would play the drum parts, singing the song in my head, then go back and play a guitar over it, and that kind of technique. But when you're limited, you start bouncing your tracks. But those first demos we were sending to record companies were just on a 4-track in a local college, where we had access to. And so that's the tools we had to work with at the time. You get as creative as you want. I think that's really good advice, what you're talking about. At the end of the day, it's not about the tools. It's about the vision you kind of have in your head of what you want to do.
Ultimately, it is that. Yeah, it is that.
Let's talk about the new release. This release, again, has very kind of sci-fi, maybe that's not the right word, but very atmospheric sci-fi kind of feel to it, which has been kind of a theme for you as far as the sci-fi part of it. And now I'm going a lot on, how you title the songs. I'm imagining that you have kind of a vision for each track with the title somehow. And so can you talk to me about that, about how this kind of came into your realm of, I like this comic book sci-fi kind of feel about what I do?
It's a really long and silly story, actually, because I never started out thinking that. And I certainly, I don't really believe in aliens. I've never met aliens. It's just one of those things where a couple of things fell into place, and all of a sudden I found myself with these associations.
Yeah.
The first full-length album I put out was titled Not of This Earth, after a really bad sci-fi movie. Not because I believed in the film, it was because I'd lost touch with my high school friends And we had a band at one point, and when we used to rehearse at the drummer's house, and we take a break, and his mother used to make us sandwiches or something like that.
Yeah.
The TV would be on. This is back ancient history when there were like 4 channels of television or something.
Yeah.
And they would be showing these bad films over and over and over again. And this one film was on called Not of This Earth. And we memorized it because there was this period where we were rehearsing a lot. And every time that we would take a break and the TV would be on, it would be on. So we could literally act out the entire movie. So years later, I'm on the other side of the country and I'm thinking, I want to come up with a funny title for this because maybe my friends will see it and they'll reach out. I'll put my address on the back of the album cover, which I did.
Yeah.
Crazy me, right? It's so innocent. And so anyway, I did that. But then, of course, it got recognized and people just assumed that I was this crazy sci-fi, not on this earth thinking guy. And I thought it was kind of funny. So the next album comes along and I got a deal to do what became Surfing with the Alien, but it wasn't titled Surfing with the Alien. It was titled Lords of Karma. I'd finished the album. I delivered it. I did one interview before the album was pressed. And it was with a British journalist who loved the album, but told me at the end of the interview that he hated the title.
Yeah.
And then the interview was over. And I called up the record company and I said, the weirdest thing just happened. And I know I'm going to get run out of town after you guys put out this record. So is there any chance we could change the title of the album? And they said, yeah, we haven't pressed it yet. We haven't done the album artwork or anything yet.
Wow.
So I'm talking to this guy. His name is Jim Kozlowski, who happens to be about 6'3". He's got long platinum blonde hair. He was the product manager at Relativity Records. So we're laughing and we're looking over all the titles, the 10 songs. And I said, okay, Surfing with the Alien. Everyone will know I have a sense of humor. Let's use that. And he laughs and he says, well, we should put my namesake character on the cover. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, the Silver Surfer.
Yes.
That used to be my, my radio DJ name.
Love is the power supreme.
Yes. So I literally did not know what the Silver Surfer was because growing up, my parents wouldn't allow comic books in the house.
Right.
So he sent me the first 2 issues of the Silver Surfer. And of course, I fell in love with the whole thing.
Yeah.
Turns out Jim lives in Manhattan, just down the block from where Marvel was, a struggling company at the time. He goes down there and this is during the days of the PMRC. So he makes a deal that we can license the artwork. There's no singing, so they don't have to worry about offensive lyrics or anything like that. So Tipper Gore would be happy. And we make this license to use the imagery from the very first issue of the Silver Surfer comic strip. And of course, I didn't know, I wasn't thinking back then about it. I just thought it was a really great image. I love the fact that he was sort of a guy who had all this metaphysical struggling going on in his life. And just the whole thing was just so huge and dynamic. Again, but I was thinking humor, like people are they're going to know the real Joe once they hear the title and the song. And the album was really a celebration of guitar. It wasn't, and it was really kind of a retro sounding record because it wasn't speed metal. You know what I mean? It wasn't Yngwie or like my friend Steve Vai or, Marty Friedman and Jason Becker, all these guys that were like really popular for playing really fast at the time in a real metal way. Here's this guy, I come along and I'm kind of playing like Chuck Berry and Hendrix and Page. And so it was a bit of a throwback, but then all of a sudden the album hits the charts and it keeps going up and up and up.
Yeah. And
people assume that I relate to the Silver Surfer. And then they look and they go, oh, your other album is Not of This Earth. You must be totally into sci-fi and aliens and everything. And then when I shaved my head, I just really sealed my face.
And the sunglasses, right.
That wasn't the thing I was looking for, but my hair was falling out. And I was thinking, I got to come up with a look.
Yeah.
And I showed up at a gig, right, with a beanie like this, because I think it was cold at the time. We were playing up in Reno or something. And I had sunglasses on. And I walked out on stage with Stu and Jonathan. And without thinking, I just took off the hat and the sunglasses. And they were so horrified.
Yeah.
They were not ready for Joe without the hair, you know?
Yeah.
And they were like, you can't walk out on stage like that tonight. You got to do something. How about the glasses? And I thought it was a joke. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'll wear the glasses. So I walked out on stage that night with the sunglasses on, and the reaction from the audience was so palpable. I mean, it was really unique. And, you know, we'd been on tour a lot. And so I was used to a certain amount of reaction, but that was entirely different. And I thought, wow, this is like something I could really get used to, because the glasses shielded the lights.
Yeah. No,
blinding my eyes. And suddenly I had a prop, you know, just one little thing. Yeah. And it really made the difference.
They thought you were taking it to the next level, kind of, you know, showmanship, you know?
Yeah. And it was a joke. And afterwards we marveled at it, because everyone could feel that there was a shift in how people were reacting to me.
That's super interesting, though, because, you know, I talk a lot on this podcast. What I really love about life is that intuition thing that very few people really pay attention to. And even if they do, kind of feel like they don't trust it. And I've been of the mind always like, oh, man, this is such an important thing to listen to in your life. And just the story you're telling me about changing the title of the record and stuff was that thing, that moment, that intuition that a lot of people would just not even see or notice. But you paid attention to it to the point that it kind of became a brand or something that worked for you, worked for the music, worked for the showmanship, whatever you want to say. That's really important in life, to listen to that kind of intuition, isn't it?
It is. And you can't be prepared for what the domino effect it has. Right. But you have to, you know, I used to tell my students, I still do at the G4 camps, that you have to prepare for good luck. And that means practicing and getting, you know, all of your stuff together. Make sure you have something to show just in case there's a knock on the door, you know. And this is a typical moment where something I could never have imagined suddenly I was confronted with. And the word confront, I mean, it really is. I mean, just having that journalist say how much he disliked the album title and explain, and he explained it to me why, it just opened my eyes to the idea that I'm going to be perceived not in a truthful way and not out of malice, but it's just that they don't know who I am. So they're just going to start making assumptions, and I might want to take control of that.
Yeah. No, I think that's worked out for me too in many ways in life. That when you listen to that voice, somehow things kind of can tumble in the right direction, even if it doesn't seem perfect in the moment, or it kind of gets to some place often that makes sense. That's why I'm always here, you know, spouting off about how important it is to listen to those voices that are telling you, you know, those feelings, the gut feelings you have of let's I like this, I want to go with this. And it might not seem like you're moving the right way in one given moment, but you might end up somewhere that you want to be. I want to talk to you more about just recording, because I read things about the record, the press release where you were talking about setting a new standard for the record, for an instrumental guitar record. And I think this was a bit of a pandemic record. I put out pandemic records and stuff too. We all had time to sit in our places and play music and record. And you did this one kind of with people and remotely sending you tracks and bouncing stuff back and forth. But can you talk a little bit about just the difference for you of this record, so people can kind of understand what you meant by setting a new standard and having the gates of creativity kind of wide open for it?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it was so interesting. I mean, tragic that it would happen, what happened the last 3 years. But if we just sort of take the microscope down into the world of Joe to show how the unexpected can create these strange results. So after 2019, I'm out on the Experience Hendrix tour. And actually in between those legs, I go to Jim Scott's wild studio in Valencia, California. And I record really the old fashioned way, to a large degree with Chris Chaney and Kenny Aronoff and Eric Codier, and we're basically just hanging out in a crazy room, just bashing out these songs and doing overdubs and the usual way. And
it's like walking into Blue Velvet when you walk into Player's studio, because he's got every imaginable instrument in the history of rock music in this giant room, and the best stuff, and it's all just sitting there. It's really incredible. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, it's great. I love talking about that place. I love talking about Jim Scott. He's an amazing human being, such a talented engineer, producer.
Right.
And we had such a great time there, and we made this really interesting album called Shapeshifting. And then all of a sudden we can't tour behind it. And it got worse and worse, as we all know. And so myself and Sony decided we need to release the album anyway. That's our job. I won't be able to make a vaccine or do anything else that other people are supposed to be doing, but I'm a musician. I'm supposed to make music, and I've just made this. So let's just give it to people, and we'll hope that we can tour 6 months later. But obviously 12 months later, I realized that this record is probably not going to get a tour. And by the time I come out again, people will kind of think, well, that was 2020, what have you got now? So it was like, wow, I've never done that. I've never left a record untoured, but I was going to have to do that. So I started to think, well, how are we going to make this album? And I got together with Eric Codier, who I've worked with since 96. He's actually been in the band for a couple of tours, but he's been a co-producer and a Pro Tools operator on many of my albums. And we basically have always thought we could make some different kinds of albums that would be different from, just, let's say, piling into Skywalker and standing in a room and bashing out rock tunes. And so I said, well, I got this crazy idea. And it was going to be, let's make two albums. Let's make an instrumental record, and let's make a vocal record, because my new keyboard player, Ray Thistlethwaite, is an amazing singer. And maybe by the time we hit the road, we'll have these two albums, and we'll just give them away for free as a way of showing people what the band can do. And of course, that didn't get to happen because the pandemic, wore on. And then I realized, okay, probably should just think about making a new album of instrumentals. That might be the best way to do it. During that process, my deal with Sony that went all the way back to 1989 finally came to an end. And it felt like this is a great moment to move on. So I called my friend Max at Ear Music, who I'd met a little bit more than 10 years ago when he picked up the Chickenfoot albums worldwide. And I told him what I was up to doing. And so we shook hands over the water and decided to start making some albums with a fresh approach. And the technical part of it is that, I wound up writing in several rooms in the house and recording in several rooms in my house, including this little control room here. And I wound up not using any of the, great amps that I had, even though we recorded with them. In the end, SansAmp plugin, the old one, like from the 90s, wound up being the one that sounded the best. So I did this whole album with all these guitar tracks, and it was all done with DI guitar. And then the sound of it, we coaxed out of the SansAmp plugin. And, Greg Collar, our mix engineer, I should point this out because there's a big difference between just hearing SansAmp on your laptop. Yeah. And when somebody like Greg gets a hold of it, and he would pull my recordings off and put them through, Fairchild's, and he had Les Paul's very own 1176. I mean, he had some really amazing pieces of gear. Yeah. Beautiful, big, humming, warm, heat producing tube limiters and compressors and EQs. but the plugin really allowed itself to, be expanded, which I think is really important, which means that technically the information was there, because as you know, you can't make something bright if there's no brightness to be brought out. It's just, you're just adding hiss,
Yeah.
And that's what we found with this SansAmp plugin, is that not only did it bring more of my personality to the speakers than, let's say, taking a Marshall head and, taking a simulated out, or using a load box and a Palmer speaker simulator. All that stuff seemed to make it smaller. Whereas going DI and then letting the SansAmp plugin bring out the personality somehow made it get bigger, and you could just make it as big as you want.
Yeah. So
we wound up with these beautiful guitar sounds.
Yeah, I thought the record just sounded really beautiful, and I wanted to talk to you about that too, as far as not just how nice it sounds, but there's such a difference in the sounds you're playing. I noticed on several tracks, and for me, as a guitarist in the studio, you can sometimes do 4 or 5 different guitar parts going at once, and I want to talk to you about that too in this recording process. When you have something like the SansAmp or something that you're using that sounds beautiful, do you find it difficult ever to limit yourself down to, like, there's so much going on in so many directions, I have to figure out, something that's working here and go with that?
Oh, I think that what I've learned over the years of making lots of records with great musicians is to give them space to take control of that world. I was looking at a clip just yesterday of a recording at the site in Northern California, not far from here. And it would have been in 93, I think it was. And it was Jonathan Mover and Stu Hamm. And I went there, I showed up with a 58 Esquire and a Wells amp. I think the Wells amp is over there in the corner. And an old 69 Marshall 4x12. And I said, I'm going to do the sessions like this. And everyone was like, whoa, how's this going to work? But it really helped because, Jonathan could really take control of the drum space, and Stuart Hamm could really take control of the bass and add some extra stuff that, before he'd just be playing the roots or, adding some slapping and tapping, whatever. But in this particular case, especially recording that song Time Machine was a good example of how if you give someone some space and let them fill it up with something interesting, then you don't wind up, with too many guitar parts piling on top of each other.
Right. It can be a little more.
We love to play. Guitar players love to play, but at some point you have to think, my guitar might sound more expressive if there's just one of me. Yeah. And you let the keyboard player and the bass player and the rhythm guitar player and maybe the engineer create something around that. So you just never know, like how, I recorded a song with Andy Johns once back in 92. It was a song called Crying from the Extremist record. And the guitar performance was one take live in the studio, me plugged into a little Zoom headphone amp, mistakenly getting recorded.
Wow.
And when we got to the end of the take, Andy Johns turned around with tears in his eyes going, "That's it. You just did the take and I forgot to set your amp up." He said, "How are we going to deal with this?" And eventually we just used it, and he had to, work around it. But it reminded me that sometimes, I'd say almost always, a great performance doesn't need very much.
Yeah, no, I've talked about that too. I tell a story about working with T-Bone Burnett, and we're mixing our record at his house in his studio, and he was working on doing research for doing a blues record for possibly working with B.B. King, and he would come downstairs with his laptop and plug it into the console, and he would play these blues songs that had one microphone up in the room, few musicians around it playing, and every single time he played a track, it hands down beat our track, and I was just like, Jesus. But it was a good lesson, because what you're saying about performance, which is kind of what I was talking about with the old studio thing too, the old studio setup, your performance really mattered, and it really was captured on that tape. And these days when I listen to some of the pop music especially, it's just, I hear some real good singers, and there's some good songwriting, but it just doesn't seem to be quite at the forefront of what I grew up listening to is the performances of, Aretha Franklin or some of the Rolling Stones songs or whatever you would have of these guys just kind of standing in a room playing.
Yeah, well, it's one thing for sure is that there are every generation needs its own thing, its own sound, its own approach.
Yeah.
And it's never going to sit well with the former generation. It just never does,
Right.
And so that's cool. That's the way of the world, you know. I remember the first time I was watching that documentary, Jay-Z playing at the Madison Square Garden. And the thing that I loved about that the most was that when he would start any song, of which I knew hardly any, everybody in the audience knew every word.
Yeah.
And they were joyous in singing it with him.
Right.
And we're talking about a rap artist, and that's certainly not what I grew up with, but I could see that he connected with his art. He connected with a generation. They loved him for it. They memorized every word. I mean, the expression of joy on their faces as they sang along with him, it was pretty amazing. And, you can see that at a Metallica concert and you can see it with younger artists and older artists. So I don't think it matters if it's Harry Styles or if it's, B.B. King. It's every generation makes that connection, and it's real. It is the truth. And as musicians, we need to always accept. It's very important to accept not only what other people like, but what we like. I mean, that's important. And the only way you can be truthful, to put on a truthful performance, is to accept yourself and what you really like.
Yes, very true. I always felt like the idea of rock and roll wasn't about this era or that era or this sound or that sound. Rock and roll was always about the energy in the room at any given show, and like you pointed out, whether it was in early 60s or Eminem in the 2000s or music of today, you can find that energy out there. It's an audience and a band connecting together to kind of create that energy, and hopefully positive energy is what I shoot for,
Yeah.
So the record's out, touring. You're going to be out there touring, playing shows with Kenny.
Yes, Kenny Aronoff on the drums, Ray Thistlethwaite playing keyboards and rhythm guitar, Bryan Beller back on bass, and the four of us start out. And maybe about 4 weeks from now, I think the 20th or 21st is the first show in Riverside, and we've got about 10 weeks of touring. I'm so excited about it. I just did a kind of a gig last weekend. It was kind of like the first one I've done in years. It was unusual. I mean, this year I've been doing a lot of art shows where I've been going to Wentworth galleries on the East Coast and showing my artwork. On this particular one, we were invited to the Monsters on the Mountain Metal Festival that was in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Beautiful town in the Smoky Mountains. And but I wasn't playing. I was actually just going there to show up and meet the fans of the artwork. And I wound up playing about 4 songs in this small room for about 50 people. And it was such a cool gig. I'd forgotten how excited I get when I get to play in front of anybody.
Yeah.
I'm such a ham, I guess. It doesn't bother me that it's not 50,000 people. But there was a moment where I think we only had the room for about 45 minutes. So I wasn't able to play a lot of music, but I got the signal, that I could play one more song. And I'm looking at this list on my computer, and I'm thinking and it's just me on this teeny little, like 1 foot stage, with the laptop and a small PA.
Yeah.
And I'm playing these guitars that I've painted, that have been purchased by the art lovers there. And I decided I was going to play a song called "If I Could Fly," and I was just going with my moment. You know what I mean? I looked at the list and I said, "Oh, I really want to play that one right now. I don't know if it's going to go over, if it's the right thing to play." a metal festival. And so that song really doesn't fit with that. But I just went with how I felt. But
Yeah.
I could tell as soon as I started playing it that the appreciation in the room was spot on. I picked the right song for the right moment.
Very popular melody in that one, right?
It was just a beautiful moment. It reminded me of how much I miss playing live in front of audiences. I love that thing that you create, the togetherness, the energy, the synergy that you create with your fans. I'm so looking forward to that.
Yeah. So you haven't been touring since the pandemic kind of lockdown?
Yeah.
Wow.
The only public things I've done have been the art shows, and that's been great, but it's not exactly the same as putting on your guitar and running around with the band, so.
That's going to be incredible. I did want to mention the song "If I Could Fly" with the Coldplay thing that happened, and I don't know anything about it, but I just was wondering, do you think they just kind of stumbled onto your melody, or do you think they had heard your melody and stuff like that before?
I have to say no comment.
That's what I thought you were going to say. But I wanted to ask anyways because I was really interested in that. I figured they stumbled onto it, but who knows? Yeah. I mean, do you ever run into that in your own work? I've already played this melody. I can't, do this again. Or, how do you come across brand new stuff? As a singer-songwriter, it doesn't matter that I've played a G chord 1,000 times and so, but when you're doing instrumental melodies like that, it must get more of a struggle as you go on to find more new stuff to do. I could only probably come up with a dozen melodies,
I think it's important when let's say if you're setting up with a bunch of people to make a record or something like that, you have to allow the atmosphere to permit the people you're working with to remind you that maybe you're echoing somebody else, because otherwise you get into trouble. So I'm always totally cool with that. And I show people some songs and musicians are funny that way. They'll say, oh, this is kind of like that song. It's just like this song. And they're not trying to be mean,
right? But
it's important for everyone to say, I've heard something like that. You might want to avoid going in that direction, because we do that with everything else. When you decide to put on a green hat, you might say, well, I've seen other people wear it, so I guess it's okay. Or I've seen my best friend wear it, so maybe I should pick another color. So he doesn't think I'm getting in on his green hat territory. Yeah. But I know it's a funny analogy, but musicians are the same way in that, let's say if Steve Vai and I are releasing records at the same time, which we do often, what we do is we send each other the albums before they come out, before we're finished, to let each other know where we're going. And it is a way, because we've known each other since we were kids, of just enjoying our musical friendship, but also it's a way of saying, if you're going to do that, then maybe I'll go this way. So stay out of your way.
Yeah.
And so it's important that I think that we do that. And if there had been, let's say, imagine yourself, let's say, or you and me, we get together every Saturday and we trade songs to see if we can come up with the ultimate hit song, And one day I play you a song and it goes like this, right? And then 6 months later, we're writing songs again, and you come in and you say, oh, I've come up with this thing and I think it's really cool. And I go, hey, that sounds like that thing I wrote 6 months ago, and I showed it to you. That would be normal, wouldn't it? That would be like a normal thing to do. So it's important that when you're making a record like that, that you get those things out of the way so that you can elevate your version of it to some new area, so that you're not copying somebody else.
Yeah.
You can create an homage to them.
Yeah.
Because we're all using the same 12 notes.
That's what I so much of music, pop and rock, is built on each other too. That's what
it is.
That's what we grew up listening to it for, right? Because we liked it and we wanted to play it, so we're playing our version of it. Yeah. And that's
it's a moving landscape. This has come up a lot during the G4 clinics, and a good way to explain it is that if you were going to make a blues album, you are going to copy the blues idiom. And if you don't, then your album will not be accepted by the blues community or covered by blues magazines or online, whatever. You won't make the blues charts.
Yeah.
So the only way to get into that world is to copy, to a certain degree, every other blues record that's come before you. Let's say you're making a reggae record. How can you make a reggae record without copying the basics of reggae music?
The style, right?
Right. So dance music, I mean, Four on the Floor, who owns that? I don't know. Right. So there are things that we all decide like, okay, these elements are okay to copy, but these elements, when put together, you're not allowed to copy. You have to come up with your own. And that's kind of like where we are right now. We're saying for decades, it was melody and harmony. If those two things line up, then you're in trouble, in terms of copyright.
Yeah.
In the last few years, recording vibe has won a couple of court cases, which is really scary because that never would have worked 20 years ago, but now it is.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
It's a minefield out there, but the short answer to your original question is, talk it over with the people you're making records with, and you want to hear it from your bass player, your drummer, if they think that you've copied somebody else, because you can't listen to everything.
Right. That's for sure. Well, I really love the record. I love the atmosphere. I imagine these tracks are going to make their way into lots of movies and stuff like that, and games and stuff. But I also really like Bluefoot Groovy, East 104th Street, 1973. Pumpin' reminded me of Jeff Beck and a Blow by Blow record, just about,
great album.
22 Memory Lane was really beautiful, gorgeous melody on it. And the last one on there was Desolation.
Yes.
And it was almost a classical music track, like a modern classic music track. It was really quite stunningly beautiful, and
thank you.
I really enjoyed it, and I just want people to go out and look for it. I want to say thank you for joining me today. We probably went longer than I should have with you, but I appreciate you talking to me. I think we probably could talk about this for hours and hours, but I'll let you go, and I want to thank you. But look for Joe out on tour. I saw him out on tour, and one of the most impressive things I saw you do was you did a one-note, like 2-minute solo where you took that note from its highest to its lowest and then back up to its highest again during the Hendrix show. I saw you, and I was really impressed that you could make one note do that. It wasn't about how many notes I could do. It was just like, I'm going to show you how much drama I can put into this one note. It was a beautiful showmanship, and I really enjoyed what you do.
Thank you.
I think you're a master virtuoso, and thanks so much for coming on the show and talking to us.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you. This has been fun. Great. Thank you.
You take care of yourself. Have a nice day there in San Francisco. I hope the sun comes out for you.
Yes, that'd be good. I could use some sun.
Yeah. All right. We'll say goodbye then. Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So that's the show for today. Thanks for listening, guys. Again, another guy who followed intuition and really went with his gut. And I think it's super important that we all pay attention to those voices, those gut feelings we have, and following them through life, because this is all we got. So thanks for joining us today, Staring at the World with Kirk Newman. Look for the podcast everywhere they have podcasts out there, and subscribe and give it a good review, give it a thumbs up, and look for the future podcast coming your way, because we'll have a bunch more coming for you, a bunch more interesting people to talk to. So thanks for joining us. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans, Kirk Newman. Please be sure to download, subscribe, rate, and review, and keep listening wherever you get your podcasts.